In the heart of a bustling city, Jamal Brown, a 25-year-old tech mogul, lived a life of luxury and success. Yet, amid the glitz and glamour of his penthouse, Jamal felt an inexplicable void, a yearning to uncover his roots. Raised by loving adoptive parents, he always knew he was adopted and cherished the life they had given him. However, the need to understand his origins grew stronger with each passing year. Determined to find his biological parents, Jamal embarked on a journey that would not only reveal his past but also challenge his perceptions and deepen his understanding of family, identity, and love. Jamal grew up in a nurturing home with his adoptive parents, Grace and Thomas. They had taken him in as a baby, showering him with love and opportunities. They told him about his adoption when he turned 18, assuring him of their unconditional love. Despite his deep gratitude for his adoptive parents, Jamal couldn't shake the curiosity about his biological roots. He wondered why his birth parents had given him up for adoption and what they were like. As his technology business flourished and his wealth grew, Jamal dedicated more resources to finding his birth parents. He hired a team of private investigators, but the search was fraught with challenges and dead ends. Yet, he remained undeterred. After months of relentless searching, the investigators finally located his biological parents, Linda and Robert Johnson, who lived in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Upon receiving the news, Jamal felt a mix of emotions: excitement, nervousness, and fear. He wondered what his birth parents would be like and why they had given him up for adoption. Would they welcome him or reject him? Despite his doubts, Jamal knew he had to meet them. However, instead of revealing his true identity as a wealthy CEO, he decided to disguise himself as a struggling young man. He wanted to meet them without the influence of his wealth, to see who they truly were without prejudice or expectations. Jamal traded his designer suit for worn, baggy clothes and styled his hair to look unkempt. His appearance now reflected that of someone down on their luck. With a heart full of anticipation and apprehension, Jamal left his penthouse and headed to the modest neighborhood where Linda and Robert lived. The well-kept streets and tall buildings of his world gave way to humble homes and small family businesses. After a bus ride and a walk through unfamiliar streets, Jamal arrived at a modest house with faded paint and a small garden. His heart pounded as he approached the door, mustering the courage to knock. He thought about his adoptive parents, Grace and Thomas, and the love they had given him. He knew they would understand his need to seek answers. With a deep sigh, Jamal knocked on the door. Seconds felt like an eternity as he waited, his heart racing and palms sweaty. The door opened, and Jamal found himself face to face with a middle-aged woman with graying hair and tired eyes. It was Linda, his biological mother. For a moment, they stared at each other, trying to recognize one another. Linda looked at him with confusion and curiosity, unaware of who this young stranger was. Jamal struggled to hold back tears as he saw the face of the woman who had given him life. In a trembling voice, Jamal introduced himself as a young man looking for work, inventing a story about how he had arrived in the neighborhood by chance. Linda, though suspicious at first, felt compassion for him and invited him in for a glass of water and some rest. As Jamal entered the house, he realized he was embarking on an intense emotional journey. He was about to meet the people who had made the hardest decision of their lives by giving him up for adoption, and he didn't know what to expect. But he was determined to discover the truth, no matter how painful or complicated it might be. Upon entering Linda and Robert's humble abode, Jamal was greeted with a mixture of distrust and curiosity. The interior of the house reflected simple living, with worn furniture and walls in need of a fresh coat of paint. Linda guided him into the small living room, where she offered him a seat on a faded sofa. Jamal surveyed his surroundings, trying to imagine what his life would have been like if he had grown up there. Would he have had the same opportunities? Would he have achieved the success he now enjoyed? These questions haunted his mind as he waited for Linda to return with the promised glass of water. A few minutes later, Linda returned, accompanied by a tired-looking man with deep wrinkles on his face, Robert, Jamal's biological father. They both sat across from him, looking at him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Jamal, remembering his alibi, began to tell a fictitious story about his life. He told them he had grown up in foster care, struggling to get by in a world that seemed to be against him. He made up details about low-paying jobs and dashed dreams, painting a picture of a young man who had faced numerous obstacles. As he spoke, Jamal carefully studied Linda and Robert's reactions. He noticed how they exchanged furtive glances, as if communicating silently. Did they suspect something? Did they see through his disguise and recognize the son they had given up for adoption so many years ago? Despite the initial awkwardness, the conversation began to flow more naturally. Linda and Robert shared some details about their own lives, revealing the economic hardships they had faced and the sacrifices they had made to make ends meet. Jamal listened intently, trying to find some clue as to the reasons behind his adoption. At one point, Linda got up and went to the kitchen, offering to prepare something to eat for their unexpected guest. Jamal accepted the offer, grateful for the opportunity to extend his visit and gather more information. While Linda prepared the meal, Robert began to ask Jamal questions about his life and his plans for the future. Jamal improvised answers, painting a bleak picture of an aimless young man struggling to find his place in the world. He watched Robert's expression darken, as if he was remembering something painful. The meal passed in an atmosphere of awkward politeness. Jamal struggled to maintain his facade while Linda and Robert seemed to be deep in their own thoughts. There was an underlying tension in the air, as if everyone was dancing around an undisclosed secret. As the visit dragged on, Jamal realized that his biological parents seemed restless and anxious for him to leave. Did his presence remind them of a decision they would rather forget? Or was there something deeper and more painful hidden behind their discomfort? Jamal knew he was playing a dangerous game by hiding his true identity, but he was determined to see it through to the end. He needed answers, even if it meant facing uncomfortable truths and opening old wounds. With each passing minute, he got closer to unraveling the mystery surrounding his adoption and understanding the motivations behind the decision that had shaped his life. As the conversation progressed, Jamal decided to take a risk and delve deeper into his fictional story. With a lump in his throat, he revealed to Linda and Robert that he was currently unemployed and struggling financially. He described nights without a roof over his head and days without food, painting a heartbreaking picture of a young man on the brink of despair. As he spoke, Jamal watched his biological parents' reactions intently. He expected to see some hint of empathy or understanding on their faces, some sign that they were touched by his story. What he saw, however, left him perplexed and deeply hurt. Instead of showing compassion, Linda and Robert exchanged looks of disdain and disapproval. Their expressions hardened, and their words became cold and cutting. With a mixture of arrogance and relief, they told Jamal that they had made the right decision in giving him up for adoption, as they clearly could not have offered him a better life. Each word was like a stab in Jamal's heart. He had expected to find some understanding, perhaps even a hint of regret, but instead, he was met with an attitude of superiority and contempt. Linda and Robert seemed convinced that they had done the right thing by removing him from their lives, as if they had avoided an unwanted burden. Jamal struggled to maintain his composure, swallowing the tears that threatened to well up in his eyes. Disappointment and grief washed over him, but he refused to break down in front of them. Instead, he listened in silence as Linda and Robert continued to talk, each word more hurtful than the last. They told him it had been a difficult decision, but a necessary one, that they would not have been able to give him the life he deserved, that they would have been inadequate parents. They spoke of their own struggle to survive, of the sacrifices they had had to make just to make ends meet, and through it all, they made it clear that giving Jamal up for adoption had been a relief, a way to free themselves from a responsibility they couldn't handle. Jamal felt his heart break into pieces with every word. He had hoped to find a little love, a little regret, but instead, he found rejection and indifference. He realized that to Linda and Robert, he was nothing more than a distant memory, a decision made long ago and buried in the past. Despite the pain he felt, Jamal stood firm. He knew that revealing his true identity at that moment would only make things worse. He didn't want to see the greed or sudden interest in their eyes upon discovering that the poor young man in front of them was actually a successful millionaire. With a lump in his throat, Jamal stood up and thanked them for their time. He told them that he understood their decision and that he didn't blame them for what they had done. but inside, he felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, disappointment, and a deep sense of loss. As he headed for the door, Jamal wondered if he could ever forgive his birth parents for the way they had treated him. Did they deserve his forgiveness? Or were there some wounds that were simply too deep to heal? With a broken heart and a mind full of questions, Jamal prepared to face the next phase of his journey. He knew the truth would be painful, but he was determined to see it through to the end. After all, he had come too far to give up now. As Jamal left his birth parents' home, he felt the weight of rejection and confusion bearing down on him. He walked through the unfamiliar streets, lost in thought, trying to make sense of what he had just experienced. Just when he felt he could no longer bear the weight of his emotions, a familiar sound brought him out of his reverie. The soft purr of a luxury engine approached, and Jamal looked up to see his private chauffeur pulling the sleek car to a stop at the curb. The contrast between his reality and the charade he had presented to his birth parents could not have been more stark. With a mixture of relief and embarrassment, Jamal approached the car. The chauffeur, a discreet and loyal man who had worked for him for years, immediately noticed his boss's emotional state. Without asking questions, he opened the back door and waited for Jamal to settle into the leather seat. As the car drove away from the modest neighborhood, Jamal looked out the window, watching the houses and streets fade into the distance. The gulf between his world and that of his birth parents seemed unbridgeable, and he wondered if he could ever find common ground. In the backseat of the car, Jamal finally allowed himself to break down. The tears he had held back for so long welled up in his eyes, and sobs shook his body. The chauffeur, respectful of his boss's privacy, pulled up the partition separating the driver's cab from the back, giving Jamal the space he needed to vent. As the luxury car made its way through the city streets, Jamal thought of the expression of shock and disbelief he had seen on Linda and Robert's faces when they saw the vehicle. It was as if, for a brief moment, they had glimpsed Jamal's true identity, but they quickly dismissed the idea as impossible. Jamal wondered what they would have thought if they had known the truth. Would they have changed their attitude toward him? Would they have shown remorse for their hurtful words? Or would they simply have seen in him an opportunity to profit from his success? These questions haunted Jamal as the car drove into the most exclusive streets of the city. Finally, they arrived at his building, an imposing skyscraper that housed his luxurious penthouse. Jamal thanked his chauffeur and headed for the elevator, eager to retreat to the comfort of his home. Once inside his penthouse, Jamal plopped down on the couch, emotionally and physically exhausted. He looked around at the luxurious furnishings and artwork adorning the walls and felt more alone than ever. All his success, all his wealth, seemed empty in comparison to the longing for connection and belonging he felt. He knew that the encounter with his birth parents had been only the beginning of a much longer journey. There were unanswered questions, wounds that needed to be healed, and a truth that was yet to be discovered. But for now, Jamal allowed himself to simply feel, letting the tears flow and the pain wash over him. In the solitude of his penthouse, Jamal promised himself that he would not give up. He would keep searching for answers, keep struggling to understand his past and find his place in the world. Because despite the rejection and the pain, he knew his story wasn't over, and he was determined to write his own ending. An ending in which love and understanding would triumph over resentment and indifference. After spending the night immersed in his thoughts and emotions, Jamal awoke with a new determination. He knew he could not let the painful encounter with his birth parents define his search for the truth. There were questions that still needed answers, and he was determined to find them. With a clearer mind, Jamal went to his study and began to review the information his researchers had compiled on Linda and Robert. He examined every detail, searching for any clue that might shed light on the circumstances surrounding their adoption. As he dove deeper into the documents, Jamal discovered that his birth parents had fallen on hard times before his birth. Robert had lost his job and was struggling to find steady employment, while Linda worked long hours in a factory for minimum wage. The couple lived on the brink of poverty, struggling to make ends meet. These details made Jamal further question the reasons behind his adoption. Had it really been a decision made out of love, as he had always wanted to believe, or had it simply been a way to escape a desperate situation? Determined to learn more, Jamal contacted the adoption agency that had handled his case. He requested access to any records or documents related to his adoption, hoping to find some clue that might help him better understand his birth parents' motivations. While waiting for the agency's response, Jamal also began researching adoption laws and procedures at the time he was born. He wanted to understand the legal and social context in which the decision to place him for adoption had been made, and whether there was any possibility of irregularities or outside pressures involved. As he became more immersed in his research, Jamal realized that he was opening a Pandora's box. Each new piece of information raised more questions and generated more uncertainty. Had Linda and Robert considered other options before opting for adoption? Had they received any counseling or support during the process? Was there any possibility that they had been coerced or pressured into making that decision? These questions weighed on Jamal as he continued to investigate. He knew that the truth could be painful, but he also understood that it was necessary in order to move forward and find the peace he longed for. Finally, after weeks of waiting, Jamal received a response from the adoption agency. They informed him that they had some records related to his case and were willing to share them with him. With his heart racing, Jamal scheduled an appointment to review the documents in person. As he prepared to face this new chapter in his search, Jamal couldn't help but feel a mixture of hope and fear. Hope that the records might shed light on the circumstances of his adoption and the true motivations of his birth parents, and fear that the truth might be even more painful than he imagined. But despite his fears, Jamal knew he couldn't turn back. He had come too far to give up now. The day of the appointment at the adoption agency arrived, and Jamal found himself sitting in a small waiting room, his heart pounding in his chest. Anticipation and nervousness mingled inside him as he waited for the social worker to call him in to review the records related to his case. After what seemed like an eternity, the office door opened, and a middle-aged woman with a warm smile invited him in. Jamal followed her, trying to calm his nerves as he sat across from her at a small desk. The social worker, whose name was Laura, explained to Jamal that she had compiled all the available documents about his adoption. Gently, she handed him a folder of yellowed, weather-worn papers. With trembling hands, Jamal opened the folder and began to review its contents. There were application forms, medical reports, and correspondence between the agency and his adoptive parents. But what caught his attention most were the handwritten letters from Linda and Robert. With his heart pounding, Jamal began to read the words his birth parents had put on paper so many years before. In the letters, they expressed their love for the baby they were about to give up for adoption and the deep sadness they felt at having to make that decision. Linda wrote about how she had dreamed of having a child of her own, but that life circumstances had prevented them from giving her the home and stability she deserved. Robert, meanwhile, talked about his struggle to find work and how he didn't want his son to grow up in poverty and uncertainty. As Jamal read each word, tears began to well up in his eyes. He could feel the pain and love that permeated each line, and he realized that his birth parents had not made the decision to give him up for adoption lightly. In one of the letters, Linda wrote, "My dear baby, I want you to know that this decision is not made for lack of love. On the contrary, it is because of the immense love I feel for you that I want to give you the opportunity to have a better life. You deserve a stable home, parents who can take care of you and give you everything that we cannot. I hope that someday you can understand and forgive us for this difficult choice." Linda's words touched Jamal deeply. For the first time, he could see beyond the pain and rejection he had felt during his encounter with them. He could glimpse the love and sacrifice behind their decision. As he read on, Jamal discovered that Linda and Robert had gone through a counseling process before making the final decision to place their son for adoption. They had explored other options, but in the end, they had concluded that adoption was best to ensure their baby's well-being and future. With each new revelation, Jamal felt his perspective change. The resentment and anger he had harbored for so long began to transform into understanding and empathy. He could see his birth parents in a new light, not as the cold and heartless people he had encountered, but as two human beings who had made a heartbreaking decision out of love. When he finished reading the last letter, Jamal was silent, processing everything he had discovered. Laura, the social worker, offered him a tissue and gave him a moment to assimilate the information. Finally, Jamal looked up and thanked Laura for her help. He knew there was still much to process and heal, but for the first time in a long time, he felt he had found a key piece of the puzzle of his life. With a new perspective and a deeper understanding, Jamal left the adoption agency, determined to face the future with a more open mind and heart. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but he was willing to take it one step at a time. After his visit to the adoption agency, Jamal spent days reflecting on the letters and the information he had discovered. Linda and Robert's words echoed in his mind, and he slowly began to see his story from a different perspective. As understanding and empathy grew within him, Jamal realized that he could not leave things as they were. He felt the need to reconnect with his birth parents, but this time from a place of compassion and understanding. With this new purpose in mind, Jamal decided to organize a meeting with Linda and Robert, but in a completely different environment. He reserved a table at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, a place where they could talk quietly and without the financial worries that had weighed on them in the past. Jamal then contacted Linda and Robert, finally revealing his true identity. He explained to them that he was the young man they had met as an unemployed man looking for work, but that he was actually a successful businessman. He apologized for the deception and confessed that he had been looking for answers about his adoption. Linda and Robert were stunned when they received the news. They would never have imagined that this humble young man was actually their biological son, much less that he had achieved so much success in life. With a mixture of nervousness and curiosity, they accepted Jamal's invitation to meet him at the restaurant. The day of the meeting arrived, and Jamal waited anxiously at the elegant establishment. When Linda and Robert entered, they were impressed by the luxury that surrounded them. Jamal greeted them with a warm smile and guided them to their reserved table. During the meal, Jamal shared his story with them. He told them about his happy childhood with his adoptive parents, how he had discovered his passion for business, and how he had built his empire. Linda and Robert listened in awe, marveling at their biological son's accomplishments. But Jamal also told them about his search for his identity, how he had longed to know his roots and understand the circumstances of his adoption. He told them about the painful first meeting they had had and how it had affected him deeply. It was then that Jamal pulled out the letters he had found in the adoption agency's files. In a soft voice, he began to read them, the words they themselves had written so many years before. Linda and Robert were moved to tears as they heard their own words, full of love and sacrifice. Jamal explained how those letters had changed his perspective and allowed him to see things from a different angle. He thanked them for the love they had shown him in making the difficult decision to give him up for adoption and assured them that he held no grudges or resentment toward them. Linda and Robert, deeply moved, apologized for their behavior during the first meeting. They admitted that they had been filled with shame and fear when confronted with their biological son and that they had reacted defensively to hide their own pain. As the conversation flowed, barriers began to break down. Linda and Robert shared more details about the difficulties they had faced in the past and how the decision to place Jamal for adoption had been the most difficult of their lives. They expressed their regret at not being able to give him the home and stability he deserved, but also their deep joy at seeing the successful and compassionate man he had become. Jamal, in turn, told them of his desire to build a relationship with them, not as parents, but as friends. He wanted to get to know them, to understand their story, and to share his own. He offered them his support and affection without conditions or expectations. As the meal came to an end, Linda and Robert hugged Jamal with tears in their eyes. It was an embrace charged with emotion, forgiveness, and hope for the future. They knew they had a long way to go, but they were willing to do it together, one step at a time. As they left the restaurant, Jamal felt lighter and at peace with himself. He had faced his past and found the understanding and love he had longed for. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but he was willing to walk it with courage and determination. After the emotional meeting at the restaurant, Jamal and his biological parents began to build a relationship based on understanding and forgiveness. They met regularly to chat, share memories, and get to know each other better. Jamal discovered that Linda and Robert had faced many challenges over the years after the adoption. They had struggled to get by, facing financial and personal hardships. However, through it all, they had managed to maintain their love and bond as a couple. As time went on, Jamal realized that he wanted to do more for them. He wanted to help them improve their quality of life and give them the opportunity to enjoy the peace of mind they deserved after so many years of struggle. With this purpose in mind, Jamal offered Linda and Robert his financial support. He proposed to help them move into a more comfortable home, pay off their outstanding debts, and ensure their well-being in their old age. At first, Linda and Robert were reluctant to accept his help, feeling that they did not deserve such generosity. But Jamal assured them that he was doing it out of love and gratitude, and that nothing would make him happier than to see them enjoy life without worries. Touched by their biological son's gesture, Linda and Robert finally accepted his help. Together, they found a cozy house in a quiet neighborhood where they could enjoy their retirement in peace. Jamal took care of all the details, making sure they had everything they needed to live comfortably. But Jamal didn't stop there. He also offered Linda and Robert the opportunity to be a part of his life in a more meaningful way. He introduced them to his adoptive parents, who welcomed them with open arms and thanked them for the beautiful gift they had given them by entrusting Jamal into their care. Together, they formed an extended family united by love and gratitude. They celebrated birthdays, holidays, and special moments, creating new memories and healing the wounds of the past. Jamal also shared his success with Linda and Robert, inviting them to participate in his company's events and showing them the positive impact he was having on society. He told them about his values, his desire to give back, and how he had found a purpose beyond money. Linda and Robert were filled with pride as they saw the man their biological son had become. They saw in him the kindness, compassion, and strength that they themselves had wished to instill in him. And although they knew they could not take credit for his upbringing, they were deeply grateful to be able to be a part of his life. As the years passed, the relationship between Jamal and his birth parents grew stronger and stronger. They had found the peace and healing they had longed for, and together they had created an unbreakable bond based on love and understanding. Jamal knew his story was unique, but he also knew there were many other people in the world facing similar challenges. He decided to use his platform and his success to raise awareness about adoption and provide support to those seeking to connect with their roots. Every step of the way, Jamal felt grateful for the love that surrounded him. He had learned that family was not limited to blood ties, but extended to those who chose to love and support each other. And with that certainty in his heart, Jamal felt ready to face any challenge life threw at him, knowing that he would never be alone. Several years had passed since Jamal had reunited with his biological parents and had begun to build a relationship with them. His life had taken an extraordinary turn, and he now felt more complete and at peace than ever. One day, Jamal decided to throw a big celebration to commemorate the anniversary of his adoption. He invited his adoptive parents, Linda and Robert, and all those who had been an important part of his life. It was an occasion to give thanks, to honor the love and sacrifice that had made his story possible. The event was held in a beautiful garden decorated with flowers and sparkling lights. Jamal stood in front of the guests, his heart full of emotion. He began to speak, sharing his story and expressing his gratitude to each of the people present. He thanked his adoptive parents for providing him with a home full of love and opportunity, for guiding and supporting him every step of the way. He told them how much they meant to him and how their unconditional love had been the pillar of his life. He then turned to Linda and Robert with tears in his eyes. He thanked them for the greatest act of love they could have done, giving him the opportunity to have a better life. He told them that he understood the sacrifice they had made and that he admired them for their courage and generosity. Jamal also spoke of how his journey of self-discovery had taught him valuable lessons. He had learned that love and forgiveness were more powerful than resentment, and that family was not limited to blood ties. He had discovered that every person in his life, from his adoptive parents to his biological parents, had played a pivotal role in his growth and happiness. As Jamal spoke, he could feel the love and emotion emanating from everyone present. His words touched everyone's hearts, reminding them of the power of love, compassion, and human connection. When Jamal finished his speech, there was a moment of silence followed by deafening applause. Hugs and tears mingled as everyone came forward to express their love and support. At that moment, Jamal realized that his story was not his alone but belonged to all the people who had been a part of it. Every decision, every sacrifice, Every act of love had helped shape the man he was today. As the celebration continued, Jamal looked around and saw his family, both biological and adoptive, united by love and gratitude. He knew that it didn't matter where he came from, but the path he had traveled and the people he had chosen to love. In that instant, Jamal felt he had finally found his place in the world. It was not a physical place, but a space in his heart where peace, understanding, and unconditional love resided. With a smile on his face and a heart full of gratitude, Jamal promised himself to continue living with purpose and compassion. He knew his story was a testament to the power of love and the resilience of the human spirit, and he was determined to share it with the world. As the sun set over the horizon and the garden lights shone brighter, Jamal embraced his loved ones, knowing that no matter what, he would always have a home in their hearts. And with that certainty, he felt ready to face the future with courage, gratitude, and endless love.